The space station that orbited the distant star was known for many wonders. It had shining halls, moving bridges, and walls made of crystal that showed the endless stars outside. But the most famous wonder was the floating garden terrace. It was not built like the rest of the station. It was alive. The terrace floated above the main station floor, held in place by soft gravity fields. Around it grew plants that glowed like lanterns, leaves that moved like gentle waves, and flowers that opened only when touched by starlight. People from many worlds came to see it, but not everyone was brave enough to step onto its glowing path. Mira had heard stories of this place since her arrival on the station. She was a traveler from Earth, and though Earth had oceans, mountains, and skies of its own, she had never seen a garden floating above the emptiness of space. Curiosity pulled her toward it. She walked slowly through the long hall that led to the terrace, her footsteps echoing softly on the shining floor. Her heart beat faster with each step, as if it already knew that this night would not be like others. The entrance to the terrace was an arch of silver vines, each vine humming with a soft light. As she passed through, the air grew warmer and filled with a faint fragrance, sweet but not heavy, almost like the smell of rain before a storm. Mira stepped onto the floating bridge of glass that stretched into the garden. Beneath her feet there was nothing but empty space. She felt her stomach tighten, yet the bridge held her firmly as if it wanted her to trust it. She took her first careful steps and then looked around. The sight almost stole her breath. The terrace spread out like an island in the sky, covered with glowing plants and soft pools of light. Flowers opened and closed as if they were alive in more ways than plants should be. Some leaves released tiny sparks that floated like fireflies, dancing around the air before fading away. Water floated in the form of spheres, drifting slowly and shining with reflections of stars. Everywhere she looked, the garden seemed alive, whispering stories she could not yet understand. Mira moved further in, her eyes wide with wonder. Other visitors were scattered across the terrace, some walking in groups, some sitting on glowing benches that seemed to grow from the ground. But Mira was not paying attention to them. Her eyes were caught by a figure standing near the edge of the terrace, looking out into the stars. It was a girl, though not human. She had tall, graceful form, and her skin glowed faintly like soft moonlight. Her hair shimmered with streaks of silver, and her eyes reflected the garden lights in shades of pale blue. She wore a simple robe, flowing like water, and yet she seemed more a part of the terrace than any visitor. Mira slowed her steps without meaning to. Something about the girl's stillness, the way she looked out into the stars as if speaking to them, made Mira curious. The girl turned her head slightly, and their eyes met for the first time. For a brief moment, Mira felt as if she had been pulled closer, though she had not moved. The girl's gaze was calm, thoughtful, almost questioning. Mira looked back, unsure what to do, but she did not look away. It was not a stare of challenge, but one of quiet recognition, as if the garden itself had chosen this moment. The girl gave the smallest nod before turning her gaze back to the stars. Mira stood frozen for a few seconds, then slowly walked toward the nearest glowing pool. She sat down, pretending to admire the light, but her thoughts were still on that silent meeting of eyes. Time moved slowly on the terrace. The music of the garden was soft but clear, not from instruments but from the plants themselves. Leaves brushed against one another to make gentle notes, and streams of light moved like strings being plucked. Mira let herself listen, but her mind kept returning to the girl. Who was she? Was she here often? Did she belong to the people of this station? Or was she a traveler too? Mira did not know, but she wanted to. The night stretched on. Visitors came and went, but Mira stayed longer than she had planned. She walked through paths that curved in strange shapes, passed under trees that seemed to float above the ground, and touched flowers that glowed warmer at her fingertips. Yet no matter where she went, her eyes always searched for the girl at the edge. Sometimes she saw her standing still, sometimes moving slowly along the rail, always graceful, always calm. Mira told herself she should leave. She was only a traveler. She might never see the girl again, and it was foolish to hope for more. Yet her feet did not carry her away. Something about the terrace, about this night, about that first meeting of eyes kept her there. It was as if the garden whispered, "Wait." Hours later, when the garden lights began to dim, Mira finally walked back toward the silver arch. She glanced once more toward the edge, hoping to see the girl. But the place was empty. Mira felt a soft ache in her chest. She stepped through the arch and into the quiet hall, her footsteps echoing again, but this time they sounded different. She knew she would return. She had seen something tonight that would not let her rest until she found it again. Mira walked back to her small room on the station, replaying that brief meeting in her mind. A glance, a nod, and a silence full of meaning. She did not even know the girl's name, but she felt as if the garden had introduced them in its own mysterious way. She lay down on her bed, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind drifted not to Earth, not to the stars, but to the floating garden and the girl with silver hair. Far away in another part of the station, Leora, the girl from the terrace, stood by a window looking into space. She too remembered the meeting of eyes. She had seen many travelers come and go, but rarely had she felt such quiet strength in someone's gaze. She whispered softly in her own language, a word that meant both curiosity and beginning. Then she turned away, knowing she would walk the terrace again tomorrow. And so, without words, without names, without promises, two paths had begun to bend toward each other. The floating garden terrace had seen many wonders, but it knew that one of its most beautiful stories was just beginning. The next evening, Mira found herself standing once again at the entrance of the floating garden terrace. She told herself it was only curiosity, that she only wanted to see the garden lights one more time before her work on the station took her elsewhere. But deep inside, she knew the real reason. She had not forgotten the girl with the silver hair and glowing skin. The memory of those calm eyes had stayed with her through the day, following her even into her dreams. The silver arch hummed as she walked through it. Once more the air filled with the sweet scent that was both strange and familiar. Mira stepped onto the floating glass path, her heart beating faster than the first time. She remembered the nervousness she had felt before, but now her nervousness came from something else. Would she see the girl again? Or had last night been only a passing moment never to return? The terrace was quieter this time. Fewer visitors wandered among the glowing plants. The night sky outside stretched clear and wide, stars shining like jewels scattered on black velvet. Mira walked slowly along the curved path, her eyes searching. At first she saw nothing. Her chest grew heavy, as if disappointment had reached her too quickly. But then, near the far end of the terrace, by the floating lights that shimmered over the rail, she saw her. The girl was standing there again, looking out into the stars, as if she belonged to them. Her hair glowed faintly, moving with the gentle wind that swept across the garden. Mira felt relief wash over her. She wanted to walk directly to her, but her steps slowed. What could she say? What words were enough to begin speaking with someone who looked like she had stepped out of a dream? Mira hesitated. She turned to a nearby tree whose leaves gave off a soft golden light and pretended to admire it. But she could not stop glancing toward the girl.
She told herself to be brave.
She had faced star travel, new worlds, and strangers from places she had never imagined. Surely she could speak a few words to one girl. As if answering her thoughts, the girl turned her head. Their eyes met again. Mira froze, caught in that same calm gaze. This time the girl did not look away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, and Mira thought she saw the smallest smile. Mira's breath caught. She felt her legs move before her mind had fully decided. She walked toward the girl, each step measured, her palms slightly damp though the night air was cool. When Mira was close enough to speak, the girl's voice reached her. It was soft, smooth, and carried a musical tone, as though every word held a hidden note. "You returned," the girl said. Mira blinked, surprised. She had expected silence, perhaps indifference. But instead, the girl's words were gentle, welcoming. Mira found her voice, though it trembled slightly. "Yes," she answered. "I could not stay away. The garden is too beautiful." The girl's eyes glimmered, reflecting the light of the floating orbs. "The garden has always been beautiful," she said. "But not everyone returns. Many see it once and think they have seen enough." Mira smiled, a small, honest smile. "I don't think I could ever see enough." For the first time, the girl's expression changed. A true smile touched her lips, soft and graceful, and Mira felt warmth spread through her chest. They stood side by side, looking out over the stars. The silence between them was not heavy but calm, like a gentle pause in a song. After a moment, Mira spoke again. "My name is Mira," she said quietly, almost afraid her voice might break the moment. The girl turned her head slightly, her silver hair catching the glow. "Mira," she repeated as if tasting the sound. "I am Leora." The name settled into Mira's mind like a key fitting into a lock. She repeated it softly. Leora. The sound of it felt right, and Leora's eyes softened at hearing her name spoken by a human. They began to talk. At first the words were simple. Mira asked about the glowing plants, and Leora explained that her people had brought seeds from their homeworld, teaching them to grow in harmony with light. She showed Mira how some flowers opened wider when spoken to softly, and Mira laughed when she tried it herself and saw the petals unfold as if listening. Leora listened in return as Mira spoke of Earth. She told her about oceans that stretched farther than sight, storms that rolled like mountains across the sky, and forests that sang with the voices of birds. Leora's eyes widened as if Mira's words painted pictures brighter than any stars. You speak of your world with love, Leora said. I do, Mira admitted. But even Earth never had a place like this garden. Leora tilted her head thoughtfully. Perhaps it is not the garden alone, she said softly. Perhaps it is the way you see it. Mira looked at her, heart beating fast. She wanted to answer, but words seemed too small for what she felt. Instead, she smiled, and Leora returned the smile as if they both understood without needing to explain. They walked together along the terrace paths. Leora guided Mira to hidden corners where water floated like liquid stars, where vines shaped themselves into arches above the path, and where flowers glowed brighter at the sound of laughter. Mira found herself laughing more than she had in months, her voice lighter, freer. Leora's laughter joined hers, soft like bells, and the two sounds blended as if the garden had been waiting for them. Hours passed unnoticed. Mira told stories from her travels, and Leora shared quiet traditions of her people. She explained how her people sang to the plants, not only to help them grow, but to remind themselves of their bond with all living things. Mira listened with wide eyes, wishing she could hear such songs. Perhaps one day, Leora said gently, I will sing for you. Mira felt her heart skip. She nodded, unable to form a reply that would not reveal too much. But inside, she knew she wanted nothing more than to hear Leora's voice in song. As the night deepened, the garden light softened, glowing like embers fading to rest. Visitors slowly left, but Mira and Leora remained. They walked slower now, their steps lingering as if neither wished the night to end. At last they returned to the place by the rail where they had first spoken. Stars stretched endlessly before them, silent witnesses to their meeting. Leora looked at Mira, her eyes thoughtful. You are different, she said softly. Most who come here only see with their eyes, but you see with your heart. Mira's throat tightened. She wanted to say something in return, something equally true, but all she managed was, and you make this place feel alive. Leora lowered her gaze, her smile faint but warm. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was full, rich, like a pause before something new. When Mira finally left the terrace, she felt lighter, her steps quicker, her heart unwilling to let go of the night. She knew she would return again, not just for the garden but for Leora. The first words had been spoken, and with them, something had begun that could not be undone. Leora remained on the terrace after Mira's departure. She stood quietly, touching the small carved stone rail with her fingers. Her thoughts lingered on the human girl who had spoken with such warmth, who had listened as though every word mattered. A soft wind passed through the garden, and the flowers glowed faintly brighter, as if they too knew that something rare had started to bloom. And so the floating garden terrace, keeper of many stories, now carried another secret within its glowing paths. The first words between Mira and Leora, two souls who had found each other beneath the endless stars. The days on the station were filled with noise, movement, and the steady rhythm of machines, but the floating garden terrace remained different. It was always calm, always alive with soft light, as if it lived outside the station's busy world. Mira soon found herself returning there every evening, drawn by something stronger than she could name. At first she told herself it was the garden itself, the glowing flowers, the floating orbs of water, the music of the leaves, but she knew the truth. It was Leora. Each time Mira stepped onto the terrace, her eyes searched until she saw the silver shimmer of Leora's hair, or the calm glow of her presence. And each time, Leora welcomed her with that soft smile, the one that seemed to say Mira belonged there. They began to walk together more often, their paths weaving through the garden's hidden places. Mira would bring small pieces of earth with her, stories, memories, and sometimes even small objects she carried from home. Leora would listen with quiet focus, her eyes filled with wonder. as if she could see the oceans and forests through Mira's words alone. One evening, Mira brought a small seashell. It was pale and smooth, curved into a spiral that caught the light. She placed it in Leora's hand, and the alien girl turned it gently, her fingers careful as though holding a treasure made of glass. "This was once in the ocean," Mira explained. "On Earth, the sea is endless. Waves carry shells like this to the shore. When I was a child, I would walk along the sand and collect them." Leora lifted the shell to her ear. "It sings," she whispered. Mira smiled. "It is only the sound of air, but when I was little, I believed it was the ocean's voice." Leora lowered the shell slowly. "Then perhaps it still is. A memory of the sea carried across stars." She placed the shell against her chest as if listening not only with her ears but with her heart. Moments like this grew between them, soft and unexpected. Mira found herself looking forward to Leora's quiet thoughts. And Leora, though calm by nature, began to share more of her own world. One night, as they walked beneath trees whose branches glowed with soft blue light, Leora stopped and touched one of the leaves. The leaf shifted, releasing a faint hum that joined the garden's music. "My people sing to plants," Leora said, her voice almost a whisper. "It is our way. When we were young, we learned that life grows best when it is spoken to with care. So we sing. Not with words of command, but with notes of kindness. The plants remember and they answer." Mira's eyes widened. "That's beautiful. Do you mean they grow faster?" "Not only faster," Leora said, smiling faintly. "Stronger. Healthier. And they glow brighter as you see here." She gestured around the garden where the leaves and flowers pulsed softly with light, like a heartbeat. Mira wanted to hear more. "Can you show me? Can you sing?" Leora hesitated. For a moment, her calm eyes flickered with shyness. "Our songs are private. We do not often sing before strangers." Mira's smile softened. "Then don't. Not until you are ready." Leora looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Perhaps one day." They continued walking, but something had changed. Leora's eyes lingered on Mira longer than before, and Mira felt warmth each time their shoulders brushed as they moved side by side. Their curiosity about each other deepened. Mira asked about Leora's people, their homes, their traditions, their way of life. Leora spoke of cities built within living forests, where houses were grown from trees that bent to shelter families. She described great gatherings under star-filled skies, where her people sang together, their voices blending with the night until even the stars seemed to listen. In return, Mira spoke of Earth's mountains, where snow touched the peaks and deserts, where sand stretched farther than the eye could see. She told Leora about animals that filled the skies with wings, and rivers that carved paths through stone. Leora listened with shining eyes as if Mira's words were treasures greater than any gift. "You see the world with wonder," Leora said one night, as they sat beside a pool of floating water spheres. "Every word you speak carries light," Mira laughed softly. "And you make me want to see more, to notice more. Maybe that is your gift." They sat in silence for a while, watching the water drift and glow. The silence was not empty. It was full of quiet thoughts, of unspoken feelings. Another evening, Mira found herself telling Leora a story from her childhood. "I was afraid of the dark once," she said, tracing patterns on the glowing bench. "My mother gave me a lamp that looked like a star. I would keep it beside my bed and pretend I was never alone." Leora looked at her with soft eyes. "And now? Are you still afraid?" Mira shook her head slowly. "Not when I am here. Not when I am with you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Leora did not turn away. Instead, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I am glad," she whispered. Day after day, their bond grew stronger, built on curiosity and quiet moments. They learned to read each other's expressions. The way Mira's smile widened when she was excited, the way Leora's eyes softened when she listened deeply. Their steps began to fall in rhythm, their voices blending as if they had always walked this path together. Others on the terrace noticed them. Some watched with curiosity, others with quiet respect, but Mira and Leora hardly noticed. To them, the terrace became less of a public place and more of a world they shared, filled with secrets only they could see. One evening, as the stars shone brighter than usual and the garden lights seemed to hum in harmony, Mira turned to Leora. "I think we are both curious creatures," she said. Leora tilted her head, smiling gently. Yes, you are curious about my world, and I am curious about yours. Mira nodded. And maybe we are curious about each other, too. The words hung in the air. Leora looked at her for a long time, her eyes thoughtful, her lips parting as if to speak, but she said nothing. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on the railing beside Mira's. Their fingers did not touch, but they were close enough that Mira felt her heart race. The garden glowed brighter for a moment, as if it too felt the closeness between them. That night, when Mira finally returned to her room, she could not sleep. She thought of the seashell, of the songs not yet sung, of the way Leora's hand had rested so near hers. She felt as though each evening with Leora pulled her deeper into something she had not expected, but no longer wished to escape. And far away, in her own quiet space, Leora sat with the seashell in her hands. She lifted it to her ear again, listening to the faint sound. She did not know if it was truly the ocean or only air, but she smiled softly. To her it was Mira's voice carried in a different form, and she held it close as she whispered a single word in her language, a word that meant wonder. The floating garden terrace continued to glow, its plants and waters holding the secrets of countless stories. Among them now was the growing bond between a human traveler and an alien girl, drawn together not by chance but by the simple power of shared curiosity. And though neither spoke it aloud, both Mira and Leora knew something rare was blooming between them, something that felt as natural as the stars shining above. The floating garden terrace was alive with more voices than usual. A gathering had been announced, one that brought together scholars, travelers, and diplomats from across the station. The garden's paths, usually so quiet, now carried the sound of conversations in many languages. Light orbs floated higher than normal, brightening the space to welcome all. For Mira, the garden felt different tonight. It was still beautiful, but the calm that she had grown used to was hidden beneath the noise. Mira entered through the silver arch, carrying both excitement and nervousness. She wondered if Leora would be there among the many visitors. She had grown used to finding her easily, as if the terrace itself guided her eyes. Tonight, however, the crowd made it harder. She walked along the glowing paths, passing groups of people dressed in fine robes or strange garments from distant worlds. They spoke in quick tones, sharing knowledge and comparing traditions. Mira felt a little out of place among them. She was only a traveler, carrying stories and small tokens from Earth. She did not have the wisdom of scholars or the status of leaders. Then, through the clusters of people, she saw her. Leora stood near one of the tall glowing trees, her silver hair catching the light, her calm face as steady as always. For a moment, Mira felt relief flood her. No matter how crowded the terrace was, Leora still stood like a quiet star in the night sky. Mira made her way through the visitors until she reached her side. Leora noticed her immediately, and her lips curved into that soft smile that always made Mira's heart lift. "You came," Leora said, her voice calm even among the noise. "I would not miss it," Mira replied, "but it feels so different tonight. Too many people." Leora's eyes softened. "The garden is patient. It allows them their noise, but its heart is still the same. You will see." Together they walked along the edge of the terrace, but before long they found themselves approached by a group of scholars. They were tall, dressed in robes with symbols stitched in silver, their faces marked by pride. One of them looked at Mira with curious eyes. "A human," he said. "You must be from the small blue planet." Mira nodded politely. "Yes, from Earth." The scholar tilted his head. "I have read of Earth. Primitive customs, simple tools, a history filled with conflict. Curious that such a world sends travelers here." Mira's chest tightened. She had heard such words before from others on the station. To many, Earth was still young compared to the great civilizations among the stars. But she had never grown used to hearing her world dismissed so easily. Another scholar chuckled. "Do you also carry one of your strange wooden sticks? I believe you call it a flute. Simple music, but charming in its way." Their laughter was quiet but sharp. Mira lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. She felt small in that moment, lost in their judgment. Then Leora's voice rose, calm but clear. "You speak with pride, but you see only the surface. You measure worlds by their age, but you forget that youth carries its own strength." The scholars looked at her, surprised. Leora stepped forward slightly, her silver eyes steady. "Mira's people are young among the stars, yes, but they carry with them a courage many have forgotten. They step into the unknown not with fear but with curiosity. They travel far from their home not because they are forced but because they wish to learn. That is no weakness. Her words carried weight. The scholars shifted uncomfortably, some frowning, others thoughtful. At last one of them muttered, "Perhaps," before the group moved away, leaving Mira and Leora alone. Mira turned to her, her heart full. "You defended me," she said softly. Leora looked at her, expression calm. "I only spoke the truth, but to Mira it was more than truth. It was kindness, it was loyalty, it was care." In that moment she felt something deepen between them. As the evening went on, the crowd began to thin. The scholars and travelers drifted away, leaving the terrace quieter once again. Mira and Leora walked together to a corner of the garden, where glowing vines shaped themselves into an arch overhead. There the noise felt distant, replaced by the soft music of leaves brushing against one another. Mira reached into her pocket and held out something small. It was a stone, smooth and gray, carved into a simple shape of a spiral. She had carried it from Earth, a piece of her home that always reminded her of the rivers where she had found it as a child. "I want you to have this," Mira said, placing it gently into Leora's hand. "It is not much, just a stone for my world, but it has always been special to me." Leora looked down at the stone, then back at Mira. Her eyes glowed faintly as if the garden's light had settled inside them. She held the stone with both hands, treating it as though it were precious. "A gift from Earth," she whispered. "It is more than much. It is part of you." Mira smiled softly. "Then it belongs with you now." For a long moment neither spoke. The garden seemed to glow brighter around them, as if approving the gesture. Their shoulders brushed lightly, and though neither moved closer, neither stepped away. The air between them was warm, filled with quiet meaning. That night Mira walked back to her room with her heart racing. She had given away one of her most treasured keepsakes, but she felt no loss. Instead, she felt lighter, as though sharing it had tied her to Leora in a way words could not. Leora remained on the terrace long after Mira had left. She held the carved stone close, her fingers tracing its spiral shape. In her language, she whispered a word that meant both gift and bond. The garden lights shimmered in response, and she knew that the stone was more than just a piece of earth. It was a promise of something beginning, something fragile yet strong. The floating garden terrace, keeper of countless meetings, now held the memory of Mira's first gesture, a small stone given with honesty and care. And though it was simple, it carried within it the power to shape everything that was yet to come. The floating garden terrace had returned to its usual peace after the gathering. The glowing trees swayed softly in the still air, and the flowers released a faint scent like dew touched by sunlight. Mira entered through the silver arch once again, her steps slower than usual. She had been thinking all day about the stone she had given Leora. It had been only a small thing, a carved piece of her home. Yet Mira felt as if she had given away more than an object. She had given a part of her heart. Now as she walked under the soft lights, she wondered if Leora carried it with her, or if it sat forgotten among her many belongings. When she reached the quiet pond at the center of the terrace, she saw Leora sitting by the water. Her silver hair shimmered in the glow, and in her hand she held the stone. She was turning it slowly between her fingers as though it were a secret she did not want to let go. Mira felt her chest tighten. The sight filled her with both joy and fear. Joy because Leora had kept the stone close, and fear because the meaning of it might never be spoken. She walked closer, her footsteps soft against the glowing path. Leora looked up as she approached, her expression calm but her eyes carrying a warmth Mira had begun to notice more often. "You are here," Leora said quietly. "I hope to find you," Mira replied. She sat beside her, close enough to see the faint reflection of the stone in the water. For a while they did not speak. The garden was enough, its silence filled with the sound of leaves and gentle ripples. Mira wanted to say something about the stone, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she asked, "Why do you like coming here so much?" Leora tilted her head slightly. "The terrace is alive," she said. "It listens. It remembers. It does not judge. It welcomes all who step upon it." She paused, her eyes lowering to the stone in her hand. "And now it carries your gift as part of its memory." Mira's breath caught. "You really kept it with you?" Leora turned toward her, her eyes steady. "How could I not? It carries your touch, your world, your meaning." The words sent warmth rushing through Mira's chest. She smiled faintly, but her heart was restless. She wanted to reach out, to let her fingers brush against Leora's hand, but she kept them still in her lap. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Mira could feel them like threads of light weaving between them, but neither dared to pull the threads into words. At last, Leora spoke again, her voice softer. "Do you ever miss your home?" Mira nodded. "Yes, every day. I miss the rivers, the forests, the simple sound of rain on the roof. I miss the way the air smells after a storm." She looked up at the glowing trees. "But I also think maybe I was meant to leave so I could find something here." "Something?" Leora asked, her eyes narrowing with quiet interest. Mira's heart skipped. She almost said someone, but the word remained hidden behind her lips. Instead, she smiled faintly. "Something that feels like home, even far away from Earth." Leora studied her for a long moment, and though her expression did not change much, Mira thought she saw a glimmer in her eyes, a softness, a longing she did not usually show. But before either could say more, a faint sound broke the stillness. From the far end of the terrace came the voices of others, a small group walking together. Mira and Leora both turned, and the moment faded like mist in sunlight. They stayed until the group passed, and then Leora rose to her feet. "Walk with me," she said. Mira followed her along the glowing paths, their steps slow and unhurried. As they moved deeper into the garden, Leora spoke of her people's traditions, how they gave meaning to simple objects, how they believed memories could live within gifts. She spoke of the first seed planted on the terrace, and how it was watered not with simple water but with the hopes of those who built the station. Mira listened, her eyes fixed on her. She could hear the layers in her words, the way Leora spoke of memories and gifts, almost as if she were speaking of the stone Mira had given. It made her wonder, did Leora feel the same hidden pull that Mira felt? When they reached a quiet corner of the terrace where a bench curved beneath a canopy of vines, they sat again. Leora placed the stone carefully on her lap and traced its spiral with her finger. "In my language," she said slowly, "a spiral means journey. It means movement without end. When I look at this, I think of you. You left your world, and yet you carry it with you. That is a journey." Mira's throat felt tight. She wanted to tell her what the spiral had meant to her back on Earth. She wanted to say that it had always been her symbol of finding her way, of trusting that even when she was lost, the path would lead her somewhere true. But the words tangled with the feelings in her chest. Instead, she said softly, "Maybe it means our paths crossed for a reason." Leora looked at her, her silver eyes calm, but shining faintly. For a moment, Mira thought she might answer, might say something that would break the silence between them once and for all. But then Leora lowered her gaze, and the moment passed. The night grew deeper, and they both knew it was time to leave. They walked side by side toward the arch, neither speaking much, but both aware of the quiet pull that lingered. When they reached the entrance, Leora stopped and looked at Mira. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly, "and for the gift. I will keep it always." Mira nodded, her heart pounding. "I'm glad." They parted with only a small nod, but as Mira walked away, she felt the weight of all the words she had not spoken pressing against her heart. She knew Leora felt something too, but both of them seemed caught in a silence they could not yet cross. That night in her room, Mira sat by the small window looking out at the stars. She pressed her hand against her chest and whispered, "Why is it so hard to say what I feel?" On the terrace, Leora sat beneath the glowing trees, the stone still in her hand. She closed her eyes and let the silence of the garden surround her. She too felt the pull, the quiet ache of something unspoken. But like Mira, she did not yet have the courage to speak, and so the floating garden terrace kept their secret. The vines, the trees, the glowing paths, they all carried the weight of two hearts that beat with hidden feelings, waiting for the moment they could no longer remain in silence.